Welcome back to our seminar on Pedagogy and the Arts, Tools for Community Development. We're joined by Donna Nam. And Donna is a spoken word artist, arts and EDI facilitator, community organizer, and cultural worker. She is currently based in Tiohtià:ke, Montreal, on the unceded and vibrant territories of the Nyan-Kehaka Mohawk people. Her practice is inspired by regenerative patterns within nature, the exploration of her ancestry and liminality, stories of resilience and diaspora, and the expansive and evolving work of what it means to decolonize, to heal, to love, and to seek truth, even in the darkest of places. Okay, now.
Hi, Laura.
Hi, thank you so much for being here with us. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good. I'm glad that there's no longer snow outside. That's nice. How are you?
Shocking, very jarring the other day.
I woke up and opened the curtains and was like, Charlie Brown, like out of my room.
Yeah, no, I'm feeling the same. I feel like we have some nice sun today, so I feel
Mhm.
energized. I feel excited to go outside again.
Yay.
Yeah, so thank you again for joining us for this conversation. I'm very excited to get to know a bit about your work, about your creative process, and your experiences with all the different disciplines that you work in, because you do a lot of different work and it's all really interesting. So, you're an artist, a writer, a facilitator, you do community building, community organizing, and performing. So, all these elements kind of have a life of their own, but at the same time, we can see how they intertwine with each other. So I'm wondering if you could share a little bit about the root of your creative process and like where they all come from and where they all tie together.
hmm That's a big question. Well, I mean, I think the root, honestly, I think the root of my creative process is um, very much like linked to my healing journey. Um, I'm for first generation, like queer Vietnamese Chinese, daughter of immigrants who left Vietnam shortly after the war. Um, and I kind of grapple with, being in the liminal space a lot, the question of enoughness, not enoughness within my identity. Um, and so I think from that place, like that tension that I feel, being in the world as who I am and how I'm interacting in my environment and how the environment receives me, very much informs a lot of my creative process. And it's linked to my healing journey. It's linked to the journey of like finding myself, of understanding my ancestry, um, of understanding my heritage, of bringing those kind of elements in. Like my process is very much the journey itself. Like I don't think I really have um, like a destination every time. Like every time I do create something, it's from a moment that emerges after like years of stewing on something, because these are really like large pieces with like no timeline, right? It's past, present, future, all kind of in a pot, brewing, 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 and and from there, something gets made, if that makes sense.
Yes, thank you. That's so beautiful. I love how you describe it as being this like simultaneous process without really like a beginning point or an ending point. I think that's really nice. And so I wonder like does your creative process have an order then, or do you find that everything is happening simultaneously, or how does that look like for you?
Yeah, it's funny. I recently saw the movie Everything Everywhere All at Once. I don't know if you've seen it. It's amazing. Oh my God.
I had
It's
to
so
stop
good.
and say that. It's amazing.
It's
Yeah.
amazing. It's so amazing. And there's so many layers and layers and layers and layers of meaning. And I feel like that movie definitely captured the overwhelm of life. But I also think uh, of I think what creatives or artists go through. You know, it is everything everywhere all at once. It is so in a way there's no order, if that makes sense. It's like it's all here and it's all happening, and it's an ecosystem, kind of like nature, right? Like there's not necessarily an order. We know there's seasons and there's ways that you know, plants grow and trees mature, and then, you know, rain coming down, and how oceans get filled and taken out, and all these kinds of things. But there's no order. It just is. And I think that that's kind of how I see my creative process. It just is. It's all of it at once, moving in tandem with each other, and in relationship to each other. So yeah, there's not really a timeline, if that makes sense. Like a lot of the ideas that I do have are like from stories that I've gathered either from my family or stories of my lived experience. And as I'm like processing these, like in my healing journeys, you know, a poem might get written here, or like a drawing might get drawn there. But I don't control it. I kind of just listen to when it needs to happen. So in a way, the order is really dependent on the natural cycle of my own creativity, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And I really love all the analogies to the natural world that I feel like you use in your work, because ultimately, like, social ecosystems are based on natural ecosystems, and all of that is very interconnected. So it's really nice. I just love hearing you like speak about it. and and you also talk a lot about your connection to your ancestry. So is there like a transition between like an investigative process and the creative process, or again, is it like very organic and merged together, or what does that look like for you?
Well, in this specific case, like, yes, there's a lot of investigation at work that goes into the ancestral work, the ancestral healing, because it is kind of research in the beginning. You know, it's like, okay, where do I come from? Who do I come from? What's the story? You know, and that takes a long time, actually. You know, coming from, you know, immigrant parents who kind of like fled after the war. It's There's trauma, you know, and it's not easy to gather stories, or just have conversations about those times, with survivors of war, with survivors of trauma. And so, you know, with the ancestral kind of journey, for example, it's taken me at least 7 years at this point. I started that 7 years ago in 2015, kind of like, okay, I'm gonna relearn my language. I'm gonna go to Vietnam and like live there for a little bit. And now I know how to read, write, and speak Vietnamese, which I didn't know how to do before, which is like the mother tongue of the family. Because, you know, you kind of lose that language being here in Canada and Turtle Island, where you know, the sense of multiculturalism is an optical one. But you know, I think that process took some time, and that's part of the creative process too. And then finally actually rebuilding a relationship to them, rebuilding a relationship to my family with the mother tongue is actually so healing and incredible. And it takes time to build that relationship with the new me, essentially, you know. And so the investigative period is actually definitely a long one, and is I guess in a way is the beginning, if we're going to talk about order in this particular kind of theme, because I think for folks like me, or being in the liminal space, that relationship between family is and can be very complicated. And more than half the work is actually rebuilding those relationships in ways that feel like authentic to me, you know. So yeah, there's a large investigative period, but I would call it more like rebuilding relationships or strengthening relationships period. If I'm talking about ancestral work, because my relationship was very different, I would say 7 years ago compared to now, with my family, with my parents specifically. And yeah, and from that 7 years, I was able to kind of like learn about their story and learn about my story, right? At the same time, like how I wouldn't be alive, honestly, if it weren't for like just so many um, moments where, the hand of God, so to speak, or the universe just kind of came in and lifted us. And I think that's like really common for a lot of immigrant families. There's like, it's a miracle almost. So I think, from that place that then I create. But some stories, some poems that I've written have been in percolation for years and years and years before there's even anything on the page, because it takes a lot of time actually to process information that like spans time, but spans generations um, and spans systems that created our situation. So it's a lot. So yes, investigative, but I would say more relationship building. And then from the relationships, the creative process can happen.
Thank you, Donna. I really appreciate what you said about how these processes take time and how you almost need this like an unfailing patience when you're working with those themes and looking into your ancestry. And like, I have also come here from Colombia when I was really little. So I relate to a lot of what you say about feeling displacement and kind of like feeling like you're divided into two worlds a lot of the time and unsure about a lot of things. So yeah, that really resonated.
Mm, yeah, I think like this is where I write from a lot, is the liminal space. It's the in-between space. And I think there's like a lot of like hardship in that space. There's a lot of struggle in that space. And at the same time, there's a lot of beauty in that space. Like, like not being white enough to be Canadian, but not being Vietnamese enough to be Vietnamese. You know what I mean? Like when I go over there, they're like, ha, like, and then when I'm here, it's always like, where are you from? Right. So, there's tension, just being who I am or who we are if we occupy the liminal space in that way. There's always that tension of enoughness or not enoughness. I try to see it from that place of like, okay, like what can I do from this place of tension? Like, going back to the nature metaphors, edges, we call them edges. And they're, the most biodiverse regions on the planet. And it's where landscapes meet each other, right? It's where like the river meets the forest, or the beach meets the ocean, or, the mountain meets the valley, or, whatever, different ecosystems kind of meeting each other, landscapes meeting each other. And it makes sense that they're the most like biodiverse regions in the world, because it's like, here are two, very unique life forms coming together in the middle, and what can happen in that exchange, what's possible in that exchange. And it's pretty cool. It's cool to see it in that way. On a human scale, on a social landscape scale, it's much more complex. It's different, right? Because nature is always like moving towards life, moving towards life, moving towards life. Nature is not all like, systems of power, like colonialism, imperialism, like trauma. Nature's not doing that, right? Nature just does. It doesn't get in the way of itself in the same way that I think humans do. And so I feel like for me, my work is my creative process, in it being so attached to my healing journey, is figuring out like how to not get in the way of myself, in this in-between space, and like create from like a place of abundance, and not like and not like scarcity. And that doesn't mean I can't critique what's going on. It doesn't mean that I can't be mad or angry or frustrated about like why the Vietnam War even happened, or like why imperialism exists, and like why people feel the need to like occupy other nations or extract their resources, or all these kinds of things, right? Because that's part of our story too, as immigrants, but especially from people who've experienced like violence and war, at the hands of like nations who believe that they can save them, right? And so I think like I can still critique that, but from a place of abundance, and that could look like anger, that could look like frustration, but that can also look like gratitude and joy, and like what are the different ways I can tell these stories from this liminal space, like kind of honoring the way that I see, I think nature do it so beautifully, and also like not get trapped in the negative spiral space that can happen being in the liminal space, which is totally okay. I'm not judging myself for those moments that like are, come in and out of the process, but I think it's always important to like balance, how the creative process works, and the energy around it as best I can. Yeah.
Thank you. That is so powerful. And I just really love how you sum up the complexities of that liminal space so beautifully. And I also love your analogy about the ocean meeting the water, or not the water, the ocean meeting the land, and like these types of natural borders, because it's like a beautiful kind of like poetic contrast to what we've created as borders, and how those are geared towards life and ours are really not. So that's really interesting thing I'm going to be reflecting on a lot, I think.
Yeah, thank you.
And so a lot of the folks watching today, they're artists, they're educators, they're facilitators as well. Just curious about like any ways that you think that we could encourage and explore creativity within our practices, especially when we're working with different communities. Like, how do you do that within yours? And what are maybe some tools or practical ways that we can take from you and like use it in our practice as well?
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess that's an interesting question. How to promote creativity in different groups. I mean, I think that it's about, I think really just trusting that everyone is creative in their own ways, and how to figure out, setting that kind of container, so that people believe it themselves, as well as you go along. But an example I can think of is just being versatile with the material that you're working with or that you're bringing in. Like, just because I do a lot of spoken word or poetry doesn't mean I can't bring in like collage elements, or drawing exercises, or body movement, breath stuff. I think it's important to kind of see where people are at, and kind of also gauge what people are willing and not willing to do as well, because I think creativity can be really scary for people. There's like a connotation to like what an artist is, and I grapple with that as well. Like, what does it mean to be an artist or call yourself one? There's definitely like I think a level of borders as well within the world of artists, and who gets considered and who doesn't, as an artist, right? And that can be hard for someone like me, where I'm not a full-time artist. I'm a creative person, and I consider myself an artist in that way. But am I touring with my shows? Am I publishing books all the time? Am I driving force? Is that it? And it's not. It's very different. So I would say just be willing to explore with many different mediums: the body, the word, the image, photos, videos, even TikTok. Like, if I'm working with younger people, you know, the way that I facilitated like 7 years ago, it's not necessarily going to cut it, in the same way, in terms of materials that you bring into the space or examples that you bring into the space. So I think really catering to your audience, but also like I think in spaces where you think art or creativity might not be welcome. Like for example, I do a lot of EDI facilitation, like equity, diversity, inclusion facilitation, and that's like a very different crowd, compared to like doing a spoken word workshop for people who are very ready and willing to explore, right? Whereas like learning about anti-racism or anti-oppression, for example, you wouldn't expect there to be writing exercises or drawing exercises or poetry. But, I bring poetry and spoken word into the space because it also tells the same stories that encyclopedias do, just in a different way. So I think that there's always a place for art in whatever it is that you're facilitating. Maybe it's a music video, maybe it's a poem, maybe it's a quote from an artist. I'm always trying to highlight artist voices in the space, just as much as I do like academics that are in the space, balancing that out, because art does touch people in different ways. That's the power of art. It just catalyzes information to be integrated and understood in very powerful ways because it penetrates us. It's very different, I think, than just, straight lecture style or PowerPoint style or, doing, exercises that don't involve their participation. So I think just inviting creativity in all the ways that you can, by also bringing in many different forms of creativity into the space, is a good way to kind of promote it. I think it softens the space a little bit when there's art and there's music and there's dance and there's movement, there's breath, there's reflection, there's sharing, and all those things are creative things. I think expanding what we think creativity means and showing that in different ways can be really powerful too, for myself as a facilitator, but also for the audience. I don't know if that answered the question. I can't remember the question now. I kind of just went off the top of the dome. I'm sorry.
No, that's great. That definitely did answer my question. I totally agree with what you said about expanding our definition of creativity and who gets to be called an artist, because I feel like in community arts and community facilitating, the whole idea is like we're all capable of being creative, of feeling things in a certain way, of understanding really complex problems and issues and systemic issues in a way that's like reaching us internally, like it's tied to our emotions and our experiences. So I really love what you said.
Thank you.
And yeah, thank you so much for everything you've shared. Is there anything, like one last thing that you want to share with the people who are watching today before you wrap up?
I don't know. What do I want to share?
Not to put you on the spot or anything.
I guess just like, I'm not saying that people don't already do this, but something that I'm really working on this year specifically, and really trying my best to be disciplined with this, is like consuming art as well, like as much as I can. I can't remember who it was that told me. It might have been my friend who's like a documentary filmmaker, and I remember her saying that she watches like 4 or 5 hours worth of documentaries a day, and I was like, how do you why like how do you do that? That seems really rough, and she makes like social justice based documentaries, so very challenging but needed content. And I think she then told me that she was keeping up with this discipline because she had heard from someone else that a prominent author, a prominent writer would say that he would read just for as long as he would write. And that kind of like really struck me. It kind of really was like, oh, okay. And so he would write for 4 hours a day, read for 4 hours a day. And it makes sense. It almost feels like it's obvious, but it's it just struck me personally. I was like, right, like I need to make sure I'm getting out there as much as I can and seeing how people are telling their stories differently and pushing myself to, see dance shows, see theater shows, fringe shows, live music, galleries, reading, reading from many different authors who have many different styles. And I find that that's where I get a lot of my inspiration too, that there's never one way to tell a story. And that's what art is. It's telling something, it's telling some kind of story. So I think, um, I would say, invest your time in taking in the way that other folks tell their stories, and to be inspired, but also just to see that there's like infinite possibilities out there. And I think that that's what can keep your creativity and your artistry fresh and evolving while still being unique to you. But yeah, that's maybe the last thing I would leave with, just something that I'm working on right now. Because sometimes I'm not very good at that. Sometimes I'm kind of like stuck in my own bubble, my own way of telling a story. But since I've really disciplined myself this year to kind of make sure I'm consuming a lot of different type of art from many different types of artists and many different forms, it's really inspiring. It's like, oh, well, yeah, spoken word and poetry might be my base, but I think, whatever outcome my projects end up having, it's gonna have movement, it's gonna have sound, it's gonna have, you know, participation from the crowd. What might that look like? Oh, it might have an image here, maybe there's a video there. I don't know, but I think that's the cool thing, is that there's no boundaries. And when you're seeing what people are doing right now, it's like, it's incredible. It's incredible the way people are telling their stories now, especially using technology too. So be open-minded, I think, as artists, and I think not get stuck in your own way of doing things. Yeah, if that makes sense. Like, be open-minded to other forms of telling stories, other ways to tell stories.
That is such a valuable piece of advice. And I feel like that also opens the door for so much collaboration. Like, you get to see what other people are doing. It's like you get inspired, you work together. That's really lovely.
Yeah. And I think collaboration is so key. It's already limitless as yourself, right? Like, there's no one way to tell a story. There's no right or wrong way to tell a story. But when you add that possibility with other people, it's like, it's infinite. It's actually really infinite. It's really cool. Yeah.
Absolutely. And so beautiful. So thank you, Donna. Thank you again for being part of this conversation, for taking some time today to chat and share a bit about your practice and the things that inspire you and move you. We're so grateful to have you here.
Thank you so much, Laura. And Natalia, thank you. You're like there. But thank you so much for having me. I hope you guys have a good day.
Thank you. You too. Take care. We'll talk soon.